Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 629. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we chat with Christopher W.H. Davis, author of Agile Metrics in Action, How to Measure and Improve Team Performance. Why more metrics? Well, first, the M in SPaMCAST is for metrics. Just saying. Secondly, metrics are important tools for teams and organizations when used wisely. Many in the Agile world hear the term metric or measure and run screaming from the room. Combining metrics and Agile is not an oxymoron. Remember, after you've listened, buy a copy of Chris's book using the link in the show notes. And don't pay full price. If you're buying anything on the Manning website, use the discount code PODSPAM20 and get a 40% discount. Great books, but why pay full price if you don't have to? Davis. Christopher Davis has been working as an engineer, manager, author, and consultant focused on innovation since the 20th century. Since coming to Microsoft 4 years ago, Chris has been focused on retail innovation with Fortune 500 companies. Prior to that, he worked at Nike, where he designed the platform behind Nike Fuelband and running apps. I've used those. Helped redesign their ecommerce system and led their initial push to go cloud native while writing the influential book on measuring software development teams, Agile Metrics in Action. Currently finishing his Ph.D. in technical management, designing state-of-the-art working models for human and AI collaboration, Chris also enjoys playing classical guitar and building robots with his kids. Are you ready to talk Agile metrics? It's time for the interview. Christopher W.H. Davis, author of Agile Metrics in Action, How to Measure and Improve Team Performance from Manning Publications. Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks so much, Tom. I'm really excited to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity for being on your show.
Excellent. I am looking forward to it. Let's just dive right in. The whole idea of Agile metrics, I've heard people say those two words don't go together. That's an oxymoron. I've heard other words used in that conversation that we won't put on the podcast. Why is that a wrong answer?
Well, I can actually get on my soapbox and really talk about this one for quite some time. Just, probably one of the reasons I wrote this book. But I think when you really take a step back and look at it, I think firstly, Agile really has become a methodology for managing uncertainty in product development. And anytime you have any kind of uncertainty, I think people get tentative and hesitant to measure it, especially if you take developers, engineers, oftentimes a very kind of methodical mindset, how to build something right, how to do something really well. And, when you kind of enter a little bit of that fear of the unknown and then being, basically told that you're going to be measured on something where you're not sure where you're going, I think, it causes a lot of hesitation, and that causes a lot of pushback against the concept of metrics in Agile, right off the bat. But then, also Agile is really squishy. It's different based on the team, based on the team dynamic. It's really focused on the individuals, how well a team is working, building something that works. And when you really look at those tenets, it's sometimes you can look at that and say, well, how can I measure something as kind of broad as that? But, I would come back and say, I think the Agile tenets are set up extremely well for being measured. How well does your software work? There's all kinds of metrics that can go into that. What's it supposed to do? How are people using it? What are the goals of putting things out, putting them out for people to use them? And these are all very measurable things that you can put metrics against. The whole concept of continually improving, making sure your team's getting better as they develop and grow together and continue to develop products, iterate on them. These are things where you always want your process to improve. Yeah, you improve it by measuring it. You iterate on it. You want your product to be better. You want your customers to be happy. You can measure that. What are the metrics you use around customer satisfaction or usage or growth? And so, I would say that it's absolutely not an oxymoron at all. It's a squishy process, and it's different based on the team and the product and the technology. But at the end of the day, you can always take a step back and really understand kind of how your team is working, how well they're working, measure that, and then what they're building and what the value is.
You've made a very logical and reasonable call to measure. Why then, I mean, with all that reason, how would you go about just doing that? I mean, if things are that squishy, right? And again, I understand, I heard the uncertainty in there, right? The whole discussion of uncertainty. How can we get to a point where we can actually talk about this? Is that sort of the journey of the book?
It is, because I mean, the whole kind of, the whole thing behind the book is, look, we're in this digital world, especially, as a developer. Well, really what's interesting, I think, if you kind of take a step back and look at our kind of post-COVID world we're living in, I think, in the last couple of months, we've seen this massive shift of people working in offices to people working from home. And, that's valid. It's important here because, in recent history, you've had lots of executives and people say, well, I'm not sure how to do a work from home policy, or I'm not sure if I trust my people to work from home. Now they have, there was no way around it. They had to figure out how to make it work. But in this kind of shift, now everybody in our daily lives, everything that we're doing is in this kind of digital space. Everything that we're doing is online. Everything, we have to log into these company systems. So, you have this, it's since I've written my book, I think some people have called it the digital exhaust. It's what is the data that you're creating when you're doing your daily work? Mm-hmm. And when you do software development, that has been generating this data for a long time, way before COVID. And really it's because, you check your code into source control systems. You're measuring, how quickly you're delivering features. You have all of this data around how good your team is working. And then you kind of go back to that part of Agile where teams are made up of different people. You should have engineers, you should have business people all on the same team. People kind of trying to figure out not only what you're doing, but how to do it and how to bring it to market. And so, when you put all of these things together, you have this complex, really scenario where it can be really, really hard to say, well, how do we measure all of this stuff at once? And I think the real key to getting started or doing this at all is really, when you start up your team, you just focus on, hey, what is our goal? And, and this is the whole thing with, Scrum and iterating. What's your goal? What you're heading towards? How do you measure that? And throughout these iterations, then you can look at that as a metric and say, okay, I have a baseline and that's something we want to improve on. Or you can say, hey, I have a baseline, and you know what? Really, this metric kind of doesn't mean anything. We're gonna move to a different piece of data. So really, it's all about kind of focusing on, what's the most important thing for your team to make them more efficient, deliver more business value. And the book goes into that a lot because it talks about, here are some thoughts on systems that you can use to collect data.
In the book, you talked about measuring teams against the Agile principles. Can you talk the readers through how, obviously we want them to read the book, so don't give away all of the secrets, but how did you get to the point where you can actually measure against the Agile principle?
Yeah, and it is a challenge, and it goes back to this kind of Agile being a little bit of a fuzzy type of problem. Even just kind of looking through the list, your individuals and interactions, the people on your team, how well is your team performing? There's a large stream of literature around, team development, team management, team measurement. Today, and this has also been accelerated because of COVID and kind of everybody leaving the office and working from home, but there's been this huge push towards more companies adopting workplace analytics. And this really, I don't talk a lot about in my book because I think this is a much broader topic than just software development. But you can use those types of workplace analytics to try and see, how well is your team functioning? Where can they improve? What works inside your company culture, and how can you use that to help, get improvement across the rest of your organization? So when you're thinking about individuals and interactions, that's all about, how is your cohesive team working together? And today there's lots of different ways you can do that. And again, it's becoming more of a commodity. With working software, for me, that's always been an easy one because you're building software for some reason. The easiest example is, right? Like no one's going to pay you to build something that doesn't do anything. So if let's just say, for example, you're on a mobile app development team, you're building a mobile app. All right, well, that app is going to some consumer somewhere. How are you measuring success? Is it the number of times people use the app? Is it the number of people that use the app? Does it crash? How often? Once you dig in there, there's tons and tons of different metrics you can look at to see how well is your software working. And then that, to me, really leads directly into this concept of customer collaboration, which I think, and I think that's kind of an old way of looking at it. I feel like customer collaboration is a very B2B type term, because if you're thinking about like a direct-to-consumer app, like an e-commerce app, or a mobile app that potentially millions or billions of customers are going to have in their hands, then you can't really collaborate so much with your customers as much as you can understand how they're using the product and then use that to continually iterate and improve on it. And so to me, that's all about really kind of the data around how well your software functions. And then, responding to change. And this is a tough one. And I feel like it's pretty ad hoc. And the example I love to use there, and again, I keep coming back to COVID just because there are so many awesome examples in the last couple of months of how people work changed overnight. And I think things lots of people have been talking about for years finally come to fruition within a month. But you look at in retail, now in my day job, I focus a lot with retailers. We've been talking about digital strategies and we've been talking about e-commerce, and some people lead there, some people lag there. But anyone who did not have an e-commerce plan basically did not collect money, when the doors closed in retail. They had to do it immediately.
That was
bad. It was bad. Like buy online, pick up in store. That was something we've been talking about for years. Suddenly overnight, every single grocery store had to implement. But, that's not a normal thing. That type of change is absolutely not normal. We live in a world where there is constant change. Of course, the only thing you can ever count on is change. There is a difference between the incremental change you kind of have to adapt to. And I think that really translates to how well your team works together. But then there's that massive giant sea change, which now we are all, totally aware can happen at any time and we don't expect it. Being able to be agile enough or nimble enough to be able to, rethink your goals and say, hey, here's how we can do this. I think that's more of an ad hoc measurement that at the end of the day, honestly, comes out in business value.
The word business value, and that's always troubled me. Maybe because I took too many accounting classes. It's, are we affecting the top line or the bottom line? I can point to another bookcase in my room, and I think there's a half a dozen books written explicitly on business value, and none of them agree. So when we're talking about measuring business value, great word, love it. That's the way we should focus on, but what are we really talking about?
Yeah, you're totally right. It's a tough thing to measure. And, but here's what I love about leadership. And here's what I love about business. And I've learned this throughout my career, starting off as an engineer, I built things. But really, one of my very first jobs, I worked for a very small family company, and I was an engineer, but it was such a small company that the owners of the company, essentially the family that owned it, I went to their office. I talked to them. They told me what their plan was. They explained why I was doing the work I was doing. They gave me tickets to football games. We had a relationship. And when I went to work and I built things, I knew why I was building it and what I was doing. And, and back then, and this is like, the early 2000s, it was really, and then now this is like it's, funny to see how history changes things, but it was a travel consortia, like Expedia had just come out and people were starting to just bypass travel agents. And so the company that actually empowers travel agents, we've got to make travel agents more relevant. So let's play in the same space. And we tried to build tools that were better than Expedia, but for travel agents to give people the reason to go there and not just do it themselves. But, I understood that. I understood that was our business, and our business value to our customer were those travel agents, and then ultimately anyone that wanted to travel. Fast forward later in my career, working for a much, much larger company that, you're a couple clicks down from the CTO. And in some, let's be real, in some companies, the CTO is not even, technically on that business leadership team. They tell him what to do. And then he get money to empower his team. And then, so in that case, what is business value? I feel like you get so removed from it as an engineer that it's really hard to kind of sit down and focus and say, well, how am I delivering this value? What is it? But, and it goes back to the fun thing about business is, hey, you can just make stuff up. You can make a business out of anything you want. I could, braid my dog hair as a business if I wanted to. I'm looking at my dog on my lap here. I could write a book and make that my business. I can be an engineer and make that my business. Or I could do all of these different things. And every business is going to have maybe a slightly different operating model. They're going to make money a little bit different way. They're going to have different values, a different culture. And it's really that combination of all those things together that make that unique value for that business. And I feel like as long as the shareholders and the board of directors agree it's the right thing, then okay, great. Then they're creating business value. And I think, as we all know, especially in these crazy times, no matter what your position is on something, there's someone who's going to vehemently disagree with you.
And be happy to tell you about it.
Yeah.
You are spending a lot of your time now in the AI world. Given where you are today, would you have taken a different tact with the book on Agile Metrics?
I probably absolutely would have. I wrote this book a couple years ago at this point, and at that time, machine learning was really starting to come up. We were hearing stories about how Amazon was unlocking machine learning, how Google was using machine, Microsoft was using machine learning, all these major, massive tech companies, and really starting to see the value in it. And in fact, at the time, I went to my manager and I said, we should probably invest in this AI thing. And he looked at it, he's like, yeah, we should absolutely do it. But then it goes back to, this was a large company. By the time we got it far up enough on the chain, people were like, it's not a priority.
Nah, that's Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly. Ironically, now they're investing tons of money in it, but it's all good. But machine learning is just so good at, you suck up all of this data, you can find these insights so much easier, being able to just put these algorithms and have that tell you kind of what's related where and making these connections that as a human you wouldn't see. I mean, a lot of my work I'm doing today is all around how people and artificial intelligence can be more efficient collaborating together. And I think that, if machine learning had been more mature, AI had been more mature when I wrote the book, absolutely. I think, the tact I would have taken would have been less manual. Some of the stuff I'm talking about in the book is very, you're kind of eyeballing it and looking at things.
Sure. And
that's important. And actually, I think one of the big evolving practices today in machine learning is called, it's machine teaching. And so you have this collaboration between people and artificial intelligence where the AI does its thing, the people do their thing, and that's called mixed initiative interaction, where they're doing different things. But then you have this ability for people to go in and look at the AI and say, nope, that's wrong, you should look at this. Or, oh, that's interesting, but maybe we need to make this connection to this data point over here. And I think if you can really kind of harness the stuff I'm talking about in my book, collecting this workplace analytic data about the team, using machine learning to kind of automatically find a lot of insights for you, that's super helpful. But then combine that with the whole concept of machine teaching, where you can have people go in and say, oh, great, thanks for these insights, this makes sense. But based on kind of what my team said, and this goes back to kind of that agile squishiness, based on the interaction of my team, this is obvious to us. We don't care about that because, we know that we don't care about this metric. This metric, maybe we didn't see. So we're going to take this and put this up a little bit higher and pay attention to it. Or maybe you could even tell the AI, oh, right, this is actually connected over here. You didn't make that connection, or we didn't have that data source. Hopefully that answer makes sense. I guess the short answer is yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'll incorporate that Maybe in my next book.
There you go. Well, and that brings me to sort of a different, sort of offbeat kind of question. The whole idea of writing a book is different, and most people have never written a book. How did writing Agile Metrics in Action change Christopher W.H.? We're going to get to the W.H. thing. Christopher W.H. Davis. How did it change you?
Writing a book. So I have always loved writing ever since I was 10 years old. It's funny, my daughter's 10 now. I look at her and I think, I remember, because that's kind of when I discovered writing. I loved to do it, all through school. Absolutely loved writing. And it was all, back then it was all fiction, basically. And then, throughout my career, I'd always had this aspiration. I'd love to write a book, but I don't know what to write about. It wasn't until, I was trying to research this topic, because I was doing this in my day job. I kind of had figured it out on my own. The more research I did, the more I realized there's not really any good practical book about this. So, I feel like I've always wanted to do this. I found this gap in my professional career and see what I can do to fill it. It changed me because you really, and this, this actually ties into maybe some of my pet peeves and some of the weird things about me. Like in your daily life, you hear, or in daily life as an engineer, right? You're going to hear people say, I'm not sure exactly how to do that. I'm going to research it. That drives me crazy. You don't actually know what research is until you really dive deep into a topic. Look at the literature, see what other people have written, combine your real world experience with kind of that massive body of knowledge, literally, hundreds of years of written knowledge that people have written. And there's lots and lots of stuff around measuring teams, management out there. And, doing this work in the book, it helped me learn and grow, one thing, and then second of all, it made me understand the topic at a depth that I certainly wouldn't have done before. And then I think thirdly, what's interesting, and, I kind of actually touched on this before, you ever say something, there will be someone that disagrees with you. And writing the book, I got a lot of positive feedback and I got negative feedback, and you kind of have to take both of those in stride and say, well, the book is published, it's out there. So it can't change, it's a physical object. It's not like a digital website. I can go tweet, it's there. So if someone wants to argue with it, I wrote it, I've got to argue with them. And that, I think, and for me, helps me open my mind a lot more and hear, some of the things that I didn't take into account, or it makes me defend my position even more, but it helps me understand why people don't like measuring Agile. Just like the first question you asked, there's a lot of people that still are against measuring their work, which to me, I don't understand. Because if anything, you have to measure your work because you use that as a communication tool to show you're doing good work, however you measure it. But then thirdly, maybe this is the last way it really changed me, is it made me realize that, I had done all this stuff in my career, but, I could go a lot deeper and become even more of an expert. So it kind of actually forced me to kind of go back to school. And so believe it or not, even now, this late in my career, I'm close to finishing my Ph.D., which is basically like writing another book. It's a lot more writing. So it just really helped me kind of understand and appreciate the education and the research that really goes into, a topic with this depth.
Before we start to wrap up, what's one good example of a misuse of Agile metrics that you've seen?
Yeah, I've got really two big ones off the top of my head. The first is all about trust. I had one job I went into, and, you start a new job and they give you all this training. One of the trainings that they gave me was this thing called the speed of trust. And it was like a week-long workshop. I don't know if anyone out there has heard of it. I love it. If you haven't, you should. I have nothing to do with that at all, but I got a ton of value out of it. The whole concept behind it was you have your work to do and your teammates have their work to do. And even though you're kind of marching towards the same goal, you each have your own, part to play. And if you trust each other, you will move much faster. If you don't trust each other, You're going to be looking over someone's shoulder. You might try and do some of their work. It's going to then impact your work, and it slows you down. And so, and I've seen this in some content all the way up to the highest levels of management, where they don't have the trust in their team. And because of that, what that ends up doing is it makes people focus on the wrong metrics. It makes them look at things kind of from a more, I look at it, as the evil dictator type. And I think, this goes to people like that. It's bad managers that have that mindset that then create this metrics as an oxymoron, view as well. Because I think this oftentimes comes from people who have had bad experiences with managers that don't trust them. They don't trust their team. And they're not really looking at what's creating value. They're looking at metrics that don't really matter as much. And so, I think trust is a huge thing. If you don't trust your team, then don't even bother. Trust is an essential element. And then the other thing is not balancing the process versus the output. And I know you can then, if I got Agile nerds out there saying, oh, no, individuals and interactions over process and tools. Yeah, right. Okay, but
still have to have some process.
Yeah, you still have to have process. It's just that the interactions with the team are more important. And so, don't throw out those other things, find that balance, because you want to, as a business, and this, I think most businesses want to scale. They want to take the learnings that they've made, the good things that are happening within their environment and their context, and help propagate that across the rest of the company so there's more success, or so you can grow the success, or you can do more of the good stuff that you're doing. And you get that by having a process that's easy for people to learn. It kind of comes naturally to them, and ideally is as embedded in your culture as much as possible. So it's just the way things are done. It's how people do things. And then if you can really find that balance, then you're gonna have a lot more success with your metrics. If you don't, again, the big problem is you end up focusing on the wrong things. You end up focusing on, processes that just make people sad that they go to work every day. You want people to get excited. For me, you can probably tell, I get excited about Agile Metrics. I get excited about it because when you do it right, it really speaks to your impact, your individual impact on the company. And I think, my last point there is, I think today, we see more of a shift of people working for companies that have, missions that really kind of speak to their passions and what they want to do. I think there's more of a shift of people kind of working for companies that do that. Like today, I worked at Nike before this, and when I wrote this book, I work for Microsoft now, and I look at Microsoft, I look at Nike's mission. I loved it. It's like, if you have a body, you're an athlete, you're going to empower people to stay fit, stay healthy. That speaks to me. Like Microsoft, it's you're empowering people to do more. How can you really harness this technology to help people do whatever it is that you want to do? Because as long as it's not like malicious hacking or something terrible, but how can you harness that for good to really lift people up? And so I think more and more people are working for companies where, they believe in the mission. It's part of that culture. And if you can really have metrics that speak to how you're delivering value within that, it's something that you roll out of bed in the morning and say, all right, I'm excited about my metrics today. So if you leave that out, you don't take that perspective on it, and you don't trust your team, that is you're setting yourself up for failure.
Understood. So before we wrap, you're Chris Davis in places. The book is W.H. Davis. Where did that all come from?
Yeah, sure. So Chris Davis is an extremely common name, and it's funny. I applied for a job one time, and they did a background check on me, and they said, they hired me. Actually, they hired me for the job. And then and I was actually moving across the country to take this job across the country. And my house is all packed up. I'm ready to go. And then all of a sudden I get this call from HR saying, don't leave, don't get on the plane, don't come out here. We're not hiring. I'm like, what? What? I went through the whole interview process. You hired me. I don't understand what's going on. They're like, we can't tell you over the phone. So they ended up sending me this thing. There was another Chris Davis with the same birthday as me. Same age, same name. And this is what these systems, look at to, correlate people together. And he was in a prison in Kentucky. I mean, he was in prison at the time. And so, and this is typical for freaking people that just blindly look at systems and don't actually do their homework. And so, I fought it. And eventually I was like, you know what? I don't want to work for this company. What a bunch of idiots. Like, who does this? But it was something. And then, also times, I've been stopped at borders and stuff because probably of this other Chris Davis, it's a federal criminal. But so when I got into writing, I thought, okay, I'm going to be Christopher Davis. And then I looked, I'm like, oh, there's already a Christopher Davis. All right. So my middle initial is W. I'm going to be Christopher W. Davis. Nope. There's already a Christopher W. Davis. Like, what? So I'm going to have a pen name. And so what I did was I took actually my dad's middle initial, which is H, which there's a kind of a long family history behind that name. But I said, okay, I'm going to be Christopher W.H. Davis. So, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, whatever. I thought, yeah, some of my favorite authors have all these crazy initials, so I might as well have them too. So I became Christopher W.H. Davis.
Wow. That is quite the story. How can people continue the conversation?
I would say, well, of course, obviously I had to go out and get my book. I love you. Honestly, I'll say that the book is a little bit dated at this point. And, some of the work that I'm doing now is really kind of, we touched on it. Like, what's next? In this world of artificial intelligence, in this world where machine learning runs so much, how do we really integrate that with people? How do we make it more collaborative? Because, it's not always good. And sometimes it's really easy to spoof. And if you want to use it in your process, you want to use it in mind with all that stuff that I was, talking about in that last question, in the vein of trust, in the vein of, matching your company culture and all of that. So I would say definitely, I'm finishing my dissertation right now. And then kind of the plan is I'm going to take that, edit it up, and that's going to be my next book. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. But if you're interested in the work that I'm doing or anything, I would say, find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find, I think. CWHD is, kind of my tag that I get to.
We'll have the link in the show notes too.
Okay, great. And feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or connect and ask questions or brainstorm. I love talking about this topic. Of course, I'm here talking about it today. So definitely happy to, if anyone wants to try and implement this, let me know.
Chris Davis, author of Agile Metrics in Action, How to Measure and Improve Team Performance. As you know, at the end here, I open up the platform. Obviously, we want people to run out, buy the book, want them to dive in, understand the principles that you laid down there. What else would you like to promote? This podcast has been out for roughly 14 years at this point. I'm looking forward to at least keeping the account active for another 14. So selling your car on eBay or any of the other, platforms like that, probably not the right use of this space. But the platform is yours, whatever you'd like.
Sure. So, I guess, if I'm going to promote anything, a couple things I would say is, again, I'm definitely going to be coming out with probably another book in the next year or so. So I would but the title's not nailed down, and I don't want to get too much into the content just because, hey, I don't want anyone to write it before I do. So, but it's definitely going to be, at the intersection of human AI collaboration, a topic I'm super passionate about. And, something in my day job, I work with the current latest and greatest technology in the space. I see the research. There's still a lot of gaps there. And I think there is a ton of stuff to be learned. One plug I would say is that if a lot of the stuff that you're kind of talking, if you're listening to this and it's really resonating and you're saying, oh, wow, this stuff is really great. I'd love to figure out how to implement this at my company. There is a company here in beautiful Portland, Oregon that I do some advising for. And, they do work with you. They're all about really kind of pivoting your company into the digital age and making sure that your culture is aligned with your product and your process. And, all up really to help you kind of take advantage of the latest and greatest in digital everything. Mm-hmm. And they are called SPARQ Worldwide. SPARQ, SPARQ Worldwide. So definitely give them a plug. Yeah, reach out and check them out. And happy to work with you through there. And then, and also one last plug. is I mentioned I was writing my dissertation and working on my Ph.D. And I've been doing that through Portland State University. And so I have to plug that program because I'll tell you, I have learned a ton about management science, technical management. Technical program management there is just really, really great. And as someone who is, moving from an engineering role to more of a, leadership role, the lessons I learned there were invaluable. It's like an MBA on steroids. So I got to plug the technical management program at Portland State University. Also, if you're really looking to kind of move your career forward, I would absolutely, and they're online too, so you don't have to be here.
But I've been to Portland, so that would be a fun place to be anyway. Christopher Davis, thank you for spending time with the Software Process and MeasurementCast listeners. This has been marvelous. Thank you again.
Hey, thank you so much, Tom. It's been a lot of fun. It was great. Thanks a lot.
In Reread Saturday News, this week, the reread of Great Big Agile and OS for Agile Leaders by Jeff Dalton dives into Chapter 2. Chapter 2 begins Part 2, which is focused on the 6 performance circles. Leading is first. Jeff points out that this is the most important of the circles because an organization without strong leadership will not allow teams to self-organize. Remember to buy a copy and read along. Links to this week and previous week's installments are in the show notes. In the next Software Process and MeasurementCast, we will feature a reprise of a panel interview originally recorded in March and aired on the Software Process and MeasurementCast number 597, just as the pandemic was rewriting the landscape of the workplace. Paul LeBerge, Susan Parente, Joanne Sweeney, John Voris, and I reconvene to reflect on an interesting year, that's, just to say the least, and the challenges of today's workplace. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?